Welcome back to Power Play. Prime Minister Mark Carney has finished a series of meetings with opposition leaders. In just over 90 minutes, he's set to deliver a speech on his so-called budget vision. To enact that vision, though, he will need some support from the opposition because, of course, his government remains 3 seats short of a majority in the House of Commons. So what would it take for the NDP to support the budget? Interim leader of the party, Davies, is live with me in studio now. Hi, Mr. Davies. It's good to see you again. I appreciate you making the time.
Nice to be with you, Vashi.
So today we have a list of demands from both the Bloc and the Conservatives that they would like to see the Prime Minister meet in order to secure their support. Do you have such a list?
Well, let me set the context for the budget. You know, it's a very important budget coming up. It's the first one in 18 months, which is a bit unusual in the federal sector. And I think the situation is pretty dire across the country. We face a jobs crisis. You know, there's thousands of auto workers facing the jobs loss. We have, you know, people losing their jobs at Imperial Oil, the forestry sectors in charge or in trouble, and we have particular problems with young Canadians with unemployment, about 1 in 6 young people out of work. On top of that, you have sky-high grocery prices, rent is unaffordable, and the numbers that came out yesterday show that grocery prices are going up, you know, another 4%, rent another 5%, and in Quebec 10%. So Canadians are really suffering, and we're looking for a budget that responds to those very real needs for Canadians. And then on top of that, you've got the threat south of the border. So I guess the bottom line is there's 2 different approaches we can take to this budget. They can take an austerity approach, one with cuts, or we can invest in Canadian communities and Canadian companies and Canadian workers and in Canadian infrastructure. And so the NDP has been very clear that we want to see an investment budget, one that builds our economy and puts people to work.
The Prime Minister says it's going to be both. Is that possible?
We'll see. You know, we've been very clear on the New Democrat side what we want to see. We've said that we will not support an austerity approach. We will analyze the budget when it comes out, and I think that's what a responsible opposition party has to do. We have to wait and see what the budget contains before we can make a decision on it. But we have said we're analyzing it through the lens of whether it's good for working families, and we've identified some key areas. We want to make sure that this budget creates good family-sustaining jobs, creates non-market affordable housing for Canadians, and supports our healthcare system, because we don't think we can have a healthy workforce, or a healthy workforce, I should say, goes along with a healthy economy. So those are kind of the things that we've identified that we need to see in the budget, and we'll see what happens.
All of that would necessitate higher levels of spending, which in turn could put a significant upward pressure on the cost of living for Canadians. Are you prepared to deal with the impact of that? And by that, I mean, like, are you prepared to support something that makes life more expensive for Canadians?
Well, governing is about choices. You know, we note that Mr. Carney spontaneously and without mentioning it during the election talked about 5% GDP spending on the military. He announced spending, what was it, $9 billion this summer. It just came out of nowhere. And if you're talking about a 5% GDP, you're talking about $150 billion by 2035 a year. So we would rather see that money go into other things. Like housing. You would rather,
just to be clear, you would rather Canada not meet its commitment to NATO?
No, our commitment to NATO was 2%.
That's $9 billion this year.
Yes, but I'm saying that he had no problem finding that money. So, but we're also talking about a 5% increase that Mr. Carney has floated, and that's unacceptable.
That's because what NATO members are talking about. That's an agreement that they've put in place for 2035.
Yeah, no, that's 5% is not a number that anybody has ever floated in Canada as an acceptable amount of money to spend on our defence forces. It was not mentioned during the election. 2% was the consensus that the parties were talking about as meeting our NATO commitments. I'm just saying that there's choices that are made. The other thing that Mr. Carney did is he has cut important revenue sources, which have put us in a revenue problem that we have right now. For instance, he cut the digital services tax, you know, a tax that was intended to apply to some of the biggest, most profitable companies in the world. And he did that, of course, to appease Mr. Trump. So not only does it hurt our treasury, and you know, we lose money that we need right now to support Canadians and the services they need, but it's also another appeasement of Mr. Trump that so far hasn't worked.
But that is, ultimately, that was done not just to appease Mr. Trump. It was also an irritant with the previous president. It's not just this case. Like, if ultimately the objective is to move negotiations with the White House along in order to secure support for the sectors and the people that you have just described are so impacted, like, don't you have to try what you have to try?
Well, the Liberals told Parliament for 5 years in the House of Commons that we had to have a digital services tax, that it was only fair to tax huge companies. We're talking Facebook, we're talking X, we're talking Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, some of the biggest companies in the world, that we wanted to get a fair bit of taxes from the profits they make in Canada, over $20 million. So the Liberals, I mean, they're the ones that told us that we needed it, and then after 5 years do an about-face. That doesn't strike me as good policy making. What I'm saying is I think that we need to see investment in this upcoming budget. This is an opportunity for us to develop the Canadian economy, to become more self-sufficient, to diversify our trade relationships away from the United States. And I think that it's not a time to cut services that Canadians rely on. We're not going to be able to cut our way to success.
Why does creating jobs, helping the Canadian economy, necessitate more spending from the government? And I'll ask again, I'll put it a different way. The debt servicing costs this year are $55 billion. Imagine how much additional money for health care or transfers to provinces or dental care, for example, could be offered instead of paying the interest charges on the debt that we hold. What you're suggesting, more investment on all those fronts, would only add to that number and take away from the ability to provide all those other services. Why is that a good approach?
Well, it's a good question to ask the Liberals. I mean, they've been in power for 10 years, and they're the ones who got us to the position we're in right now.
You supported them for
For a couple of years that we did, yeah, in order to get services for Canadians like dental care and pharmacare, things that actually save Canadians money.
But you kept them in power, to be blunt.
We did, but for specific outcomes, you know. And but what I would say is this: is if we have a huge deficit problem, then why did Mr. Carney bring in a cut to the first marginal tax rate, which is going to cost us something like $28 billion? Why did he get rid of the capital gains?
Because Canadians feel overtaxed?
Why did he get rid of the capital gains inclusion change, which they said was essential for intergenerational equity, would affect only less than 1% of Canadians with an average income of $1.4 million. First thing Mr. Carney did, he jettisoned that. That was $20 billion over 5 years. The digital services tax. So he has basically eliminated tens of billions of dollars of revenue sources raised from people who can afford to pay it. Huge tech companies, multimillionaires in this country, with the one tax break that he gave, which, by the way, will disproportionately benefit high-income earners, not the poorest Canadians. So that's what they chose to do, and of course he's run into a fiscal problem. So what I'm saying now is, now's not the time to cut services Canadians need at a time when they're really struggling with trying to make ends meet month to month. We need to invest in our country.
Have you relayed, like that meeting that you had, I think it was on October the 1st, correct me if I'm wrong, was that focused on the budget? Was that the message that you relayed to the Prime Minister? And do you believe he will be receptive to it?
Well, it was our first meeting, and we did touch on the general fiscal situation, and I was very clear with them, as New Democrats have been from the beginning, is that we're looking for a budget that helps working families. It's got to create jobs. It has to create affordable housing. It has to support and protect health care. And we will not support an austerity approach. It's absolutely the wrong way to go, and we'll see what Mr. Carney is going to tell the nation tonight. But now's the time to invest in our country, in Canadian communities, in Canadian companies, in Canadian workers, in Canadian infrastructure. That's the proper response to Mr. Trump. I don't think, instead of pursuing unilateral concessions and cutting services that Canadians need now more than ever.
I've got 30 seconds left. Are you really willing, in your party's position at this point, with an interim leader, an election of a permanent leader months away, to force an election if the question of support came down to the NDP over this budget?
That's a question entirely for Mr. Carney.
No, it's a question for you.
No, he's not. He's the leader of a minority parliament, and it's his job to craft a budget that can win the support of at least one opposition party. And we've been very clear on what he would have to do to get our support. Now it's up to him. So if there's an election coming up, which I don't think Canadians want or need, that'll be on Mr. Carney.
Okay, I got to leave it on that note. Mr. Davies, a pleasure as always. Thank you for making the time.
Thanks, Bashi.